Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 165, and we're going to cover Esther, chapter 7 through 10. Last time we left off with Esther taking a bold risk of showing herself before King Ahasuerus, and it worked. He extended his gold scepter to her, and she's asked for drinking time. She's asked for a party twice, and this is the second party. And Haman has been shamed, but he thinks there's still an inkling of hope because he's been asked to this party and he has the gallows set for Mordecai. So he still thinks things are going to work out in his favor, even though he's been shamed. And even though his wife Zeresh told him, look, if this man Mordecai is of Jewish origin, you better watch out. And at that time, the eunuchs had called him in to the party. And that's where we pick up today in chapter 7. So it says in verse 1, now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day also as they drank their wine at the banquet, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is it you request? Even to half of the kingdom, it shall be done. And listen to what Queen Esther says. This is powerful. Verse 3, then Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. And so Esther finally reveals what she wants. What does she say? She says, King, I just want my life. Now, think about this. This man is a womanizer, but he's in love with this woman. So Xerxes gets so upset, he says, what man would do this? And she points at Haman. Verse 5, then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who will presume to do thus? Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Haman became terrified before the king and queen. So verse 7, the king arose in his anger from drinking his wine and went into the palace garden. So think about this. Xerxes loves drinking, and this is the first time he set his drink down in the narrative. He's hot, even to the point where he's willing to walk away from drinking. And so Haman bows before Esther. And you see the irony in this? He wanted them, the Jews, bowing before them. And this is the second time he's had to bow before the Jews. He had to most likely bow before Mordecai to give him honor, and now he's bowing before Esther, begging for his life. But when the king comes back in, I want you to see the providence of God. This does not look like bowing and him begging for his life. This looks like assault. So verse 8, now when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where he was drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king says, will he even assault the queen with me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbonah, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, behold. So a eunuch randomly comes in at this time. And look at what he tells Haman. He says to Haman, and he says this right before the king, behold, indeed the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. So this eunuch is saying, hey, Haman, the gallows you made for Mordecai to hang him on 75 feet high, hey, they're ready if you're ready to move forward. And the king says, what gallows? For Mordecai, the one who saved my life? And the king is infuriated. But I want you to see the strategy of that eunuch. He said, the gallows are made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king says, hang him on it. And so they hang Haman on the gallows, which were prepared for Mordecai. And finally, it says the king's anger subsided. So King Xerxes has Haman's put on the gallows that he had made for Mordecai. And finally, the king's anger is abated. And he remembers Mordecai's request in the beginning of mourning. He was in sackcloth and ashes. And Esther said, if I perish, I perish. Well, this is the exact opposite of all of that. God is fighting for them without even his name being mentioned. We move into chapter 8, and it says, on that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had disclosed what he was to her. the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and implored him to avert the evil scheme that Haman the Agagite and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. Then she said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king, and I am pleasing in his sight, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who were in the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the calamity which will befall my people, and how can I endure the destruction of my kindred? So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given the house of Haman to Esther, and him they have hanged on the gallows, because he had stretched out his hands against the Jews. Now you write to the Jews as you see fit, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for a decree which has been written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring may not be revoked. And so look at this powerful reversal. The king is willing to do whatever it takes to protect Esther, Mordecai, and the Jewish people. And he's willing to undo all that Haman has set forth. He said, look, I've killed the man. I will continue to operate on your behalf. Write whatever you need to write in my name. I'll put my signet ring on it. And whatever is said cannot be revoked. And so this establishes a major Jewish holiday called Purim. And you see that in verse 17. It says, in each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's command and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many among the people of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. And so in this holiday Purim, they wear costumes even till this day. And the only analogy I could give you is like what is done in our culture for Halloween. And they're giving a play on what was happening during this time, because the edict had went out that the Jews were protected and anyone who was against the Jews would be killed. So people would convert and act like Jews and dress up like Jews so they wouldn't be killed. And the Jews were at awe at the powerful reversal. And so they celebrate to commemorate this by putting on costumes, because the people would put on costumes to act like Jews so they wouldn't be killed in fear. And that's the holiday. But let me give you some of the details of why the holiday was set. Now it says in chapter 9 and verse 5, after this edict, thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. Verse 13, then said Esther, if it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded that it should be done so, and that's the promise fulfilled. And then even look in verse 16, now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to defend their lives and to rid themselves of their enemies, and kill 75,000 of those who hated them. So outside of Susa, in one day, they even killed 75,000 people who were against them. So can you see how this holiday quickly formed? Anybody who feared or hated the Jews would act like them. People would dress up and become Jews because they didn't want to be in this 75,000 and they didn't want to be next. So in chapter 9, so much happens. Day 1, they conquer a bunch of people. Day 2, they kill Haman's family. The Jews are winning. They kill 75,000 people. And day 3, they have a further conquest and throw a celebration. And you see, initially Esther asked for 3 days of fasting. Now Esther is asking for 3 days of celebration. Everything is being reversed. God, whose name isn't mentioned, is changing everything. God is ruling on his throne, even the invisible God, not only by putting Mordecai in leadership, But with the execution of Haman and his family, what is God fulfilling? You remember Exodus 17, to utterly destroy the Amalekites? That promise is fulfilled in the book of Esther. Mordecai proclaims this holiday and he becomes leader instead of Haman. And it says in God's promise to utterly wipe out the Amalekites is fulfilled here. It's finished and fulfilled. It's powerful. And we close with chapter 10. It says, now King Ahasuerus laid a tribute on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the accomplishments of his authority and strength, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and in favor with his many kinsmen, one who sought the good of his people, and one who spoke for the welfare of his own nation. And that's how our book ends. God totally reverses everything. And if you ever need encouragement and to learn about the providence of God and to see how he works behind the scenes and makes everything work out for his glory and for your good, look no further than the book of Esther. And just to give you a little more insight on what's important to God, guess what else happened during the book of Esther? Two great religious leaders died during this time, Confucius and Buddha. They're not even mentioned here. Two great thinkers were making their marks as philosophers during this time, Plato and Aristotle. They're not mentioned. The book of Esther truly shows us what's important, and that is God and his glory. May you prioritize God and the things that are important to him, and may you see his providence working in your life and on your behalf and for your good. Because remember, he guarantees success for those who diligently seeks him. Seek him well, my friends. You guys have a good day.
Hey.